Good morning, kids, and today we're checking out a bit of a late video from Popcross Studios of turning HAZBIN Hotel characters into Marvel characters. Now, if you remember, about a year ago, he did this before by turning them into a horror story, but now we're here to just make them into Marvel heroes or villains.
There are so many musical theater references crammed into the script for this episode, it's almost unbelievable. But I just could not help myself because it's not very often that my immense love of musical theater crosses over with the kinds of videos that I make on this channel. But with so much of my audience wanting me to work with HAZBIN Hotel again, and with that show being stacked to the brim with musical theater performers, many of whom I was already a big fan of before the show, I couldn't resist working a ton of different song titles hidden in the stories of this episode. Like, I cannot express to you how much I love the fact that there is now an electro swing song sung by Jeremy Jordan that sounds heavily inspired by Never Had a Friend Like Me. That is just so many things I love.
Hey, hold on. I actually got something to tell you. That actually was inspired by Never Had a Friend Like Me.
Crammed into one song, it's amazing. Oh, and spoiler warning for Season 1 of HAZBIN Hotel in this episode. But anyway, this episode is taking HAZBIN Hotel characters and adapting them into the Marvel Universe, leaning heavily into X-Men stuff, because I'm hoping we got a Deadpool 3 trailer this weekend with the Super Bowl, but I'm recording this before the weekend, so I don't know, maybe I'm cutting in shots of it on screen, or maybe it didn't happen. And I'll put the number of musical theater song titles that I referenced on the screen now. And if someone does manage to get every single one, the first person to do it, I'll pin their comment and I will send you a free copy of my art book. But to get it, you'd have to know a thorough knowledge of musicals from Chicago and Les Mis all the way up to The Greatest Showman and Beetlejuice. So good luck! Now let's get into an episode based around a show that's probably about as blasphemous as the term Hasadiga Iboai. Now let's get into it, shall we? Let's go! Hit like! If you want,
What did he just say?
Subscribe if you feel like.
Evil
But either way, enjoy the show.
I'm sorry, that threw me. I don't know. No, that just threw me because I don't know what he just said.
Conflicts between New York crime bosses are far from uncommon. The likes of Kingpin, Tombstone, Hammerhead, and more have caused problems big and small in the city, but thankfully they've often been thwarted by Spider-Man, Daredevil, or whichever New York-based heroes happen to catch wind of the conflict first. But in the early days of many of these heroes' careers, a dangerous crime lord
Hold on, everyone. I'll be right back. And we're back.
had secretly risen up under everybody's noses, scaring every other gang in the city, but eventually falling to an unexpected foe. A foe who was not a superhero or a villain, but would come to feel only one thing for this crime lord: loathing. Unadulterated loathing. Alistair Talai was a very publicly known figure who quickly made a splash when he first appeared in New York, as he'd become the most popular radio host and broadcaster in the city. He'd frequently heckle other news sources like the Daily Bugle with his effortless wit, and be the first one to drop breaking news on hero and villain antics before most papers could even learn about them. He was even the one to reveal to the city that J. Jonah Jameson of the Daily Bugle had helped fund the creation of the now infamous Spider-Man villain, the Scorpion, causing pretty big problems for the Bugle's PR team. Many people loved Alistair. He'd give people big news and some jokes and even some songs and the old razzle-dazzle, and the whole city was like putty in his hands. And while he did mostly like staying behind the radio, he wasn't one to avoid going out for a flashy night on the town. He knew what shoes to wear and how to fix his hair and everything that really counts to be popular among the fashion scene in New York. He had truly become quite the big name in the city, but nobody could understand how he'd get his scoop so quickly, as he had a pretty bare-bones team working for him, as far as anyone could tell. But that was only because nobody could see the other side of his life. While working in his days as a famous radio host, by night he was running a New York crime syndicate that, in retrospect, people have begun to refer to as the Radio Demons, but at the time they were elusive enough that most heroes had no idea their crimes were all connected under one group.
Neat.
You see, Alistair had vast demonic powers that, to this day, nobody has been able to discover where he got them, though some have suspected that to gain demonic powers such as his, he must have friends on the other side, possibly even gain...
Okay, hold on. First reference right there. Oh, friends on the other side. Princess and the Frog.
These abilities in a deal
Dr.
with the
Facilier.
mother of demons in this universe, Lilith. Regardless of where he got them, though, he was able to transfer some of his powers into anyone who made a deal with him. But this would also mean that if any of his henchmen were captured, they'd instantly die if they tried to give up any information about Alistair. Surprisingly, the one who had finally put all the pieces together and realized that there was a new gang targeting safe houses and high-ranking members of other New York criminal groups was none other than J. Jonah Jameson, having put ample resources into looking into Alistair Talai to find any dirt he could on him. His main lead would come from a hunter outside New York that claimed to have accidentally shot a man thinking it was a deer due to antlers coming out of the man's head. The hunter claimed that despite being shot straight through the head, the man had still managed to limp away, barely bleeding. But he did leave behind a dead body that he'd been burying in a partially dug hole. The body ended up being revealed as a high-ranking member of Tombstone's criminal organization. Blood from Alistair's wound would later be able to identify him as the man that the hunter had shot. When he got all the evidence he needed, Jameson didn't even wait to put it out as an article, and recorded a video for the Daily Bugle's website revealing all the intel. And just that one video killed the radio star. Or his career, anyway, in both crime and broadcasting for a good while. Heroes of the city looked further into what they'd heard from Jameson, and then went to confront Alistair. But surprisingly, he simply confessed and accepted arrest. Most didn't understand why he didn't put up a fight, but soon it became clearer as his willingness to give in, paired with much of the evidence Jameson found mysteriously disappearing, meant that Alistair was only given a 10-year prison sentence in the raft, and would be let out after 8 on good behavior. That time eventually passed, and he was set free, then promptly started up his radio show again, also releasing it as a podcast to keep up with the times. In the new version of his show, he'd lean into the idea that he was a reformed criminal who was sorry for all he'd done, and would still amply roast Jameson on the airwaves for his anti-hero stances. He gained public appeal even more by talking about the fact that, as a part of his early release, he was now doing community service at a school for mutants, helping teach young potential heroes what good they could do with their powers and why they shouldn't go down the path he had. Every hero and crime lord alike in New York was still incredibly skeptical of him, but his broadcast did quickly become a hit once again, and everyone would just have to wait and see if the leader of the radio demons would make everyone wish that he'd stayed gone.
And that is the second reference spotted from the Stay Gone song of episode 2 of HAZBIN Hotel. So I only got 2 out of 6.
Now, at the time that Alistair had gained his freedom and come to help at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, the institution was facing its fair share of problems, as was all of mutant kind in the country. A group calling themselves the Purifiers had begun openly targeting mutants for execution on the claim that God had deemed them to be abominations. They were led by Reverend William Stryker, previously known by some for creating the Weapon X program responsible for Wolverine's adamantium claws. His lead executioner was an incredibly powerful assassin who simply went by the name Adam. Many pointed out the hypocrisy of a group that claimed mutants were abominations, using superpowered people among their ranks, but the group didn't listen or care. At least, most didn't. One member of the Purifiers, Vaggie Beatriz, was a mutant herself, but had been raised her whole life to believe that mutants were evil, and the only way she could eventually gain entrance into heaven when she died was to help humans hunt down and imprison or kill those of her own kind. Her mutation meant that her long white hair could shift into wings to allow her to fly. She could even form it and break off parts to use as spears and other weapons. On top of defying gravity with her hair, she also had purplish-gray skin, though that didn't add to her combat abilities. She'd only use her powers on one mutant hunt that she went on with the Purifiers. They found a small town with a high population of mutants, and had been requested by some of the particularly hateful people residing there to come and take care of their mutant infestation. Vaggie had cornered a young mutant who looked terrified, and she quickly realized she couldn't do what she'd been trained to. Another Purifier came to finish the mutant for her, but Vaggie promptly stopped her. For her treachery, the other Purifier used her adamantium blade to slash out one of Vaggie's eyes, then left her bleeding out on the battlefield. Vaggie fled from the event, ditching her Purifier armor, and unsure if her injury was enough to kill her. Not certain if she even wanted to live after realizing what she'd been a part of. She wanted to make up for her actions, but didn't know how. For the moment, she was just waiting on a miracle. But one did eventually come for her. The X-Men showed up on the scene and chased out the rest of the Purifiers. Vaggie was found near the outskirts of the town by Shadowcat, aka Kitty Pryde, who quickly helped bandage Vaggie's wounds. Kitty assumed Vaggie was one of the mutants from town that the Purifiers had tried to kill. And for far too long, Vaggie just let her go on believing that. Vaggie would come
Damn
to
it.
stay at Xavier's school and work alongside Kitty, who'd been a student at one point but was now a teacher at the school. They'd grow closer and closer and eventually become a couple. Though, under it all, Vaggie was frequently
Hold on. Sorry about that. I was gonna say, so I guess Kitty is taking the role of Charlie for this.
anxious of what would happen if Kitty ever learned of her true origins on the mutant-slaying purifiers. She would eventually have to find out, though, as Xavier would manage to orchestrate a meeting with Stryker and his lead assassin Adam to try and talk some sense into the group. Stryker only agreed to the meeting out of the hope that, if he showed up at the school with a hidden camera on him, some rightfully furious mutant would attack him and he could spin the story to make more people hate mutants. Vaggie knew of the meeting and wanted to stay far away from it, but also wanted to make sure Kitty was safe, who was insistent on being a part of the meeting. Vaggie watched from a distance, but still managed to be spotted by Adam. He didn't know that she'd hidden her time on the purifiers from the X-Men, but figured he could still use her presence to stir up trouble. Midway through the meeting, he claimed that the purifiers had had a spy in Xavier's school for some time, pretending to be converted to the mutant side. Realizing she was being outed and not wanting Kitty to think that she truly was a spy, Vaggie furiously ran in on the meeting, ready to form a spear and stab Adam through the chest. But thankfully, Kitty stopped her from doing anything drastic, though footage of her evident impending attack was all the fuel Stryker had needed. He'd promptly leave the meeting, stating that for the mutants at Xavier's, there was but 1 day more till Revelations. He'd cut the footage from his secret camera to make it look like Vaggie was attacking him out of nowhere, helping fuel the confirmation bias of people who already distrusted mutants. Of course, this ordeal also finally revealed Vaggie's background to Kitty, but Shadowcat forgave her surprisingly quickly. Their seasons of love would not be ended by this secret. Kitty said she knew what kind of person Vaggie was and that her past didn't define her. Plus, there was no time for a lover's quarrel as they knew the purifiers were soon to come back, and this time, not for negotiations.
I gotta say, pretty good. She can fly and make weapons with a hell. She's much better than the average gal.
Even with the X-Men being...
And of course, next up is the first man of them all, Adam.
Very skilled and vast team of fighters, and with even more upper-year students willing and eager to help, a conflict with the Purifiers was not likely to go smoothly. Not only did some of them have their own superpowers, but they were also all clad in armor laced with adamantium, a near-indestructible substance that, as mentioned, Stryker had worked with during his time running Weapon X. That was also where he had met Adam for the first time, though Adam had been an experiment done through a larger parent group called Weapon Plus. Many either forget or are simply unaware that Weapon Plus was a program that dated all the way back to World War II and had been responsible for the research that created Captain America. Adam had actually been one of the very first people to be experimented on, even before Steve Rogers, and in a way, experiments on him had been successful, but not in the way the various leaders of Weapon Plus over the years would have wanted.
Is he still
the first super soldier formula he was given had put him in a coma, but had also halted his aging. Because of this, they kept him alive in secret to continue running more and more experiments on his body, some proving successful, some not, but none of them waking him up. At least until Weapon X. He was only finally awakened by an experiment conducted by William Stryker, and by that day his body had been altered so many times that he had a whole litany of powers to experiment with when he awoke. He had flight, teleportation, super strength and speed, enhanced durability, and he could shoot condensed light projections that would burn his targets to ash. Having finally been awakened by Stryker, and now somewhat associating this man with his new abilities, Adam became incredibly loyal to the Colonel and would absorb all the man's hatred of mutants, eventually even encouraging Stryker after the Weapon X program shut down to start a movement to execute mutant kind. While Stryker had inspired Adam's hatred towards mutants, it was Adam, in truth, that radicalized Stryker and encouraged him to start the Purifiers. He kept encouraging Stryker on, saying that with Adam's vast powers and Stryker's resources, they could take out any mutant that came after them, no matter how powerful, emphasizing that it was largely because of Adam's abilities. He said to Stryker, "We can do this together, you and me, but mostly me." Adam was actually somewhat surprised that Stryker
Okay, no. I think that is a reference to Beetlejuice, but I'm not 100 on that. I'm like 75%.
ended up going for it, but once the ball was rolling, Adam would not throw away his shot at getting to use his abilities to lead a small army under his command. On top of that, Stryker still had ample supply of adamantium from his Weapon X experiments to be turned into weapons and armor, so Adam's soldiers wouldn't have to go after their targets with guns and ships and all that jazz. Unfortunately, they also wouldn't have to look very far to find others who would jump in the line to armor up and fight against mutants, as there were pockets of hate groups all around the country. Adam and Stryker then further fueled them by saying that God would bless them all, and even if they were killed in battle, they'd rise to heaven as heroes, and there could be no downside in their quest. Besides the whole, being dead thing. Well, they stood on the fake morals of doing their
being dead thing. I think that's another reference to Beetlejuice, but I'm not sure.
God's bidding. In truth, Adam didn't really care about God or religion. He was just a very hateful, sadistic man who wanted to use his vast abilities on someone, anyone, and mutants just happened to be the target he picked. He reveled not just in killing them, but even first giving those mutants the fright of their lives. Then, in following that up, he'd hear that beautiful sound that was their final cries before death. And the day after the failed meeting at Xavier's, Adam suited up and prepared. He'd long dreamed a dream of a final battle like this one to come, and he was ready to ensure that Xavier's halls were left with many empty chairs and empty tables. He set off ready to fight a fight that would provide fuel for years to come for him to tell his children and grandchildren the story of tonight.
Okay, there were a lot of references in this one, but I don't exactly know them all. I need to watch more musical theater scenes.
On the front lines, waiting for the purifiers to come, Vaggie wasn't the only reformed hero ready to fight. Penn Brightman, better known to the world as Serpentius, had been a mutant whose mutation had made him look like a humanoid snake. As a result, with few other mutants in his hometown growing up, he'd become very isolated, with his parents not knowing that there were places like Xavier's he could have been sent to. He elected to spend much of his time inside working on inventions, and would grow up to become quite the skilled mechanic. Unfortunately, he'd end up taking these skills to a group that wouldn't want to use them for the good of others. Around the time he was finishing high school, he'd seen on the news reports of a villain group called the Serpent Society, a team of superpowered villains that all had snake-themed abilities. He didn't feel inherently drawn to villainy at first, but if he could only find acceptance from villains, then he'd just have to say, hey, let's misbehave. He managed to find the group and shared what he could do for them tech-wise, and he was quickly accepted as he hoped, taking the team's oath that once you're a serpent all the way, from your first major crime to your last dying day. Though that oath would not hold up in the long run for him. At first, it was great. He'd really come alive with this group. It was like he could finally say to the world, look out, 'cause here I come. Being on the other side of this world, the villain side, was exhilarating, but he'd come to find that he still felt it was never enough. Serpentius' ego would outgrow him, and he began inventing more and more impressive machines and soon vehicles like a blimp with a death ray on it. At that point, the rest of the society thought he was going too big and flashy. They did want to be taken seriously, but they were more small-time criminals. They didn't want to watch the world burn or anything. But Pentius was out for a revenge party on a world that he felt like he'd had to cower from all his life. He said, I want the world to say my name. So he split off on his own, getting some minions and taking his blimp into New York City. Unfortunately, at that time, the X-Man known as Angel, only recently reformed from Archangel after being manipulated by the villain Apocalypse, was out on the town with an old bounty hunter friend of his called Cherry Bomb. They'd met when Angel was in his villain phase, and she kinda liked him better back then, but they still got a kick out of working together to take Pentius down. Angel flew them up to his blimp, then soon, waving through the window at the villain, was Cherry and her mutant ride. They blew up his vehicle, and Cherry wanted to just take out Pentius along with it. But Angel, being an X-Man, took a more gentle approach after they apprehended him. Technically in the attack, he hadn't actually gotten around to doing any damage to the city or killing anyone, so when Angel learned Pentius had been a misunderstood mutant kid who only found friends in a criminal group, He brought him back to Xavier's to try and give him a place where he could be around better mutant influences. Eventually, Serpentius would find he was very at home with this group, at this school. Even more so than he had been with the Serpent Society, because here, he didn't have to be a villain. He'd even developed quite a large crush on Cherry Bomb on the few occasions when she'd come by to visit Angel. But all his feelings for this group would most clearly sink in for him on the day the Purifiers came. Adam led his legion and Pentius fought back with the rest of them. Unfortunately, this all occurred during one of the 17 times that Jean Grey has been dead in this universe, so she couldn't just wipe out all the enemy forces on her own. Still, the rest of the X-Men held their own quite well, though Adam was posing a bigger problem than expected. The group had charged Alistair with using his demon powers against Adam, thinking that'd be enough, but even the demonic ex-crime lord couldn't beat him. Alistair talked a big game in attacking Adam at first, monologuing at him about how,
"Oh, Adam, even if you think mutants are sinners, you must know that
that's a little loud. That is a surprise.
death doesn't discriminate. It exhibits no restraint. It takes and it takes and it takes and it takes. But you're not going to have to wait for it. Not much longer."
But Adam showed off much more power than Alistair expected, and brought him to the brink of death, barely escaping being killed by a hair. Serpentius decided to take a shot at the leader himself, only after publicly professing his love for Cherry and kissing her right in the middle of the fight. He then took a gun that he'd built for his old war machine and fired it at the Purifier leader. He struck him right out of the sky, but only really succeeded in making him angry. As Pentius charged up another shot, he proclaimed that he wouldn't let Adam destroy his home and his new friends. He said, "This is the first place I've found where I feel like I can be sincerely me, and I will do whatever I have to keep it safe, for forever." Adam, unfortunately, just responded, "Aw, good for you," then shot Pentius with a beam of scorching light and eviscerated him. It was heartbreaking for all to watch, but it did rally all the X-Men and give them the second win they needed to finally take down Adam and send the remaining Purifiers running. Of course, they were happy with the victory, but mourned the loss of Serpentius. Or, at least, they did at first. They then remembered that they'd brought people back from the dead many times before in different ways. Sometimes before fully passing on to the afterlife, a soul remains trapped in the demonic realm called Limbo. Of course, Cherry then sadly scoffed and asked, "Okay, but is there just a road to hell? Does anybody have a map to that place?" Luckily, an occasional member of the X-Men, Magic, was the ruler of the realm of Limbo, so Our Lady of the Underground could get them in. And so they set off in search, with Cherry in particular saying, "Wait for me, Serpentius. You will be found."
Okay, I like this. I like this a lot. I got like maybe one reference, but that's it. Love it!
With simple love,
Oh, hold on.
loathing for your
Hold on. Give it a moment, and...
face, your voice, your clothing. Let's just say we love it all. I dreamed a dream of time gone by.
I thought that was another reference. Just don't know the source.
I got hoodoo, I got voodoo, I got things I ain't even tried. And I got friends on the other side.
Love that song.
Give 'em the old razzle dazzle, razzle dazzle dum. Raise a glass to freedom, something they can never take away. Don't take this horse by the reins, making red coats redder with blood stains. And I'm never gonna stop until I make them drop and burn them up and scatter their remains out. Empty chairs and empty tables. Now my friends are dead and gone. While I'm watching people pass, waving through a window. A revenge party, a party that ends with somebody's head on a spike. Just you and I defying gravity. I'm flying.
Okay, well, finally done.
Nope.
Alright, I gotta say, this was easily the most fun I've ever had recording the audio for an episode. Maybe I gotta try doing more stuff like this. Who's to say, maybe I could do a musical Multiverse Tales episode someday. But anyway, if you're new here, you might want to check out my famous cartoons on the Suicide Squad episode, because that's got Charlie from HAZBIN Hotel and Blitz from Hell of a Boss. But I also have a full episode on HAZBIN Hotel as a horror story, though it did come out only after the pilot had come out, so it doesn't have as many references to the new season. Still a good video, I'd say, though. And besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is, look out, 'cause here I come, and I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared.
Okay, I think I'm gonna go ahead and end this. Well, this was a good video, and wholeheartedly, I enjoyed it. So, to all of you out there, remember to just stay positive and keep life going. Always have a smile on your face, because you're never fully dressed without one. But, all in all, thank you all for joining me in today's video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Link to the original will be in the description below. And I'll see all you folks next time when we flick on. Peace out.